Hey, welcome to Ed, a podcast about the teaching life. This is Ed Stories Volume 1, and I'm your host, Shane Lawrence. Ed is a proud member of the Alberta Podcast Network powered by ATB. And we all know that whether we've been teaching for a week, a month, or even longer than that, there's some pretty wild stuff that happens in and out of the classroom. So on this special edition of Ed, which I'm calling, as you know, Ed Stories, 3 educators will be sharing some of their most memorable experiences from their teaching life. This is something I hope to be doing every now and then, especially when I get sick and I don't have a conversation to post. So look for these coming out here and there and everywhere. First up is going to be the host of the Planning Period podcast, Brad Shreffler, and his story about that time he tried to break up a fight.
So this is actually towards the end of the year last year. And as an instructional coach, I kind of have this weird hybrid role where I have students in my classroom, but I also have a radio. So I'm kind of admin sort of. And towards the end of the year last year, we get this radio call that something was going on outside. And I need to preface with, I rarely close my classroom door. My classroom is really it used to be a computer lab attached to the media center. So we normally leave my door wide open. My kids are in there because students are coming in for tech support to see my students. So the door's open with inviting environment and everything. And but in this particular day, there was testing going on in the main part of the media center and also our backup room that we normally use when the media center is closed. So I just said, okay, kids, you guys can come in here. Tech support's closed. You guys just chill. We'll leave the door closed and whatever. So in between class change, and a couple of my students were still hanging out, I get this radio. I hear on the radio, fight in the courtyard. And I'm like, oh, crap, I got to go. And now, to be fair, 90% of the time we get fight calls, they end up not being a fight or it was about to be a fight or whatever. But in this case, I hear radio call, fight in the courtyard. So I jump up out of my chair and I rush out the door. Or at least that's what I meant to do. I tried to open my door and I apparently did not get the rotation as correct as I needed to. So I instead did not get the door fully open. And so I turned it and pulled it and was trying to move at the same time. And I failed at least part of that. I kept moving, but the door did not. And I ran face first into the glass window on the front of my door. And I'm going quick. It wasn't even like I was slowly walking because I was trying to get out to the courtyard to help. So I do not get the door open. I go smash. And there are 2 kids in the back of my room. There's a media center full of kids testing that hear this bang. And I just open the door the rest of the way and just keep going. Deuce, I'm gone. Because I'm not looking back at my kids. And all I hear in the distance as I'm walking out of the media center fastly is my kids go, did he just? and so I bang my face in the door. I come back, and not only is there literally an imprint of my, you can see my face in the door where I hit it, the sweat of my nose is on the door. You can see the gap where my eyes are, where my forehead hit and my nose hit. And my kids have put a drawing on the board of a comic strip edition of what I just did is now on my whiteboard. So that, and I didn't erase it because I'm not, I'm me. So it's just me running directly into a door and then falling over, which is slightly exaggerated. But yeah, that was what happened to me towards the end of the year last year, is just face first into the door.
Next, Brian Aspinall is here to share his story about a lesson plan that just didn't work.
It's a coding story. But it's an important story because it helped shift pedagogy in the way I approach teaching and learning. A few years ago, when the Canadian penny went away, I was teaching grade 8 at the time. And I decided I was going to give every kid that grade 8 penny before they went to high school. A little memento, a little souvenir to remember Mr. A in their grade 8 class. But the reality was I was teaching probability. And so we were going to flip this thing. So I went to the bank. I purchased, 24 pennies of that year, gave them out to all the students in my class. Asked them to get out a T-chart, told them to put heads and tails at the top, very prescribed, like building IKEA furniture. Do this, do that, do this, do that. And I tell you, just like IKEA furniture, this lesson broke pretty fast. So I hand out all these pennies. And I said, I want everybody to flip it one time. Raise your hand if you got heads. In theory, I expect 12 out of 24 to raise their hands. Now, my curriculum is experimental and theoretical probability and the law of large numbers. So data collected from a game of chance is experimental probability. And if you were to perform that experiment a gajillion times, the results should be what it is in theory all the time. So flipping a coin is always 50-50 in theory. You flip one coin 3 times, it's never 50-50. So I say to my students, look around the room. And of course, kids in my class have already grasped it. They're like, oh yeah, it's going to be about half. And other kids in my class are like, I have no idea how many hands are up. I don't know why hands are up. And I wasn't really moving the lesson forward. I was just sort of reiterating what some students already knew and reiterating that other kids didn't know. So I said, flip the coin again and again and again. So what do you think would happen if you flipped the coin 50 times? So I fired up the Smart Notebook timer. We just actually received our smart board. And so I was using the timer for everything, which is a really bad idea. But at the time, it was engaging. When I reflect on it now, I was using the tool for the sake of the tool and not to enhance the lesson, so to speak. That's a whole nother rabbit hole we can go down. So I fire up the timer, 15 minutes. Really bad assumptions. Number one, everybody in my class can flip a coin 50 times. It's fair. Number two, everyone in my class can flip a coin 50 times in 15 minutes. That's what it will take. I walk over to the radio. I turn on the radio, and the kids go, oh, Miss Ray, it's not art class. I said, I know. I am feeling incredibly progressive today. We're going to flip this coin, listen to music and math. I even opened the door. So I walk over to the first group, the first table. It's a group of girls, and they're all reading. They all pull out this book. I said, girls, what are you doing? They said, Mr. Ray, we just want to read. And I remember looking at them going, oh, man, there's way more value in that book. That book is like 4 inches thick. These girls were ready for grade 11 by November of their grade 8 year. I thought, okay, but what do you think would happen if you flip this coin 50 times? And I'll never forget the one girl. She looked at me. She said, Mr. A, it might be 25-25. It might be 23-27. But I tell you one thing, if I flip this coin 100 times, I guarantee you that odds are that data set would be closer to 50-50 than the 50 data set. And I just looked at her and I said, oh, I'll come back. And I walked over to the next table because I didn't know what to say to her. She was right. She already knew. She didn't have to flip the coin. She already knew. I walk over to the next table and there's a kid going, he threw his penny at me. And I'm thinking, oh my God, I got to do an accident report. There's a kid in my peripheral with a little bag and he's going, there's no more pennies. Can I have your penny? There's no more pennies. I thought this went way better in the Nelson guide I just read on my prep. I walked over to the radio. I had to turn it off and then I had to close the door. But I was at a place in my own pedagogy where I wasn't ready to feel vulnerable, so I couldn't admit the lesson was going poorly. So I sat down at my desk and pretended that everybody was engaged and on task. When the bell finally rang, one student approached me and said, Mr. A, I'm going to build you an app so you can teach that better next year. I looked right at him. I said, you better, Gavin, go sit down before I throat punch you. No, I'm just kidding. But the reality was he was right. So the next day I said, what are you talking about? He said, well, I've been playing with Scratch since you introduced me to Scratch. I said, okay, what do you want to do? He said, well, there's a random function in Scratch that will pick a random number between 2 numbers. I said, yeah, a range. Yeah, a teachable moment. He said, yeah. So if I pick 0 to 1 and I let 0 be heads and 1 be tails, I'll build you an app quickly that will flip a virtual coin. And I went, holy smokes, you are brilliant. Now, the profile of this student, I don't want to put him in a box. I never want to put kids in a box. Here's a disengaged student with an IEP and a learning disability who's got this brilliant idea to create a virtual simulator for me. He works on it for about 4 or 5 days, comes back to me on Friday with all his buddies. They come in before school's even started. He's so proud of this thing. He says, put it up on a smart board. We have to show everybody. The bell rings. The whole class comes in. He's beaming from ear to ear. And I thought, oh, man, please tell me I didn't set this kid up for failure. I didn't look at his app ahead of time. Sure enough, he's got a turbo button. He says, click go. And I'm clicking go. And it's flipping this virtual coin. And it's tallying the results. And there's a turbo button. And he says, click on that turbo button. I said, what did you do? He said, well, Mr. Ray, I wanted to prove your theory wrong. I said, what theory is that? He says, I don't know. The one where you flip it a bunch of times, it should always be 50-50. I said, oh, the law of large numbers, teachable moment. He says, yeah, that. So what did you do? He says, I took all my code. I put it in turbo. I put it in a loop. When you click that turbo button, my app will ask you for a very large number, and it's going to store that in a variable that you don't see, and it's going to flip that penny that number of times. My mind was blown. I mean, again, let's look at the profile of this student. He's heading into a specialized program in high school. He's got an IEP. He's got a learning disability. Communication is not his strong suit. That's why when he told me he's going to help me teach that better next year, he wasn't trying to be disrespectful. He's trying to be helpful. But he did it. And we clicked the turbo button. And what shifted in my pedagogy is by leaving that up on the smartboard for the whole day, it removed me from the front of the room. Because I was projecting his app the entire time, I wasn't using the smartboard as a projection tool, so to speak. We were using it as a tool to explore the law of large numbers, but it removed me from the front. What's cool about it is it flipped like 700 something thousand times throughout the entire school day. It didn't get to a million. We ran out of time, but it was like 50-50 to the 13th decimal point. And I went, there's the law of large numbers. Like, there's the theoretical probability. You've just proven it with your app. And it left me in a place wondering how to quantify that experience. Like, how do you grade that? What do you grade that? Do you have to grade? Well, of course, I have to report on probability on my report card, but what numerical value can I put on a virtual simulator that a student has programmed to demonstrate the curriculum through and through completely? Last piece of the story, because I told you 10 minutes. Yeah. I said to him, do you think that you can create a biased coin? And he said, what do you mean? I said, we were talking about bias the other day in class, marked cards, weighted dice, things like that. He said, what do you want? You want a coin that flips more, heads more often? I said, yeah. Can you do that? He says, yeah, I think I can. He comes back the next day, puts it up on the smart board, same routine. He says, click the turbo button. Sure enough, it's 66% heads, 33% tails most of the time. I said, how did you do that? So I just changed my range. Before it was 0 is heads, 1 is tails. Now it's 0. I pick a random number between 0 and 2. If it's 0 or 1, it's heads. If it's 2, it's tails. And my mind was completely blown, because when I think about Sammer model, there's an example of redefinition. I've never had a biased manipulative in my probability class to demonstrate those things. And so the next day after that, you know how kids can be, well, I'm going to do that. The next day I had dice rollers, I had spinners, I had all these probability simulators that my entire class had programmed on their own time. Essentially, we're doing homework without me assigning it, so to speak. And we're creating all of these, I still call them manipulatives, whether you can manipulate it tangibly or not, had created all of these really cool simulators using, or we've gone full circle now, all those soft skills, all of the creativity, the critical thinking skills, the ISTE standards. And it all happened because my lesson completely tanked. And that's where I'm going to end it.
That's brilliant. That's beautiful. Thank you. All right, we got one more story. But first, I want to tell you about a new podcast that's coming out called Otherwise. Otherwise is a variety podcast dedicated to empowering diverse communities living on Treaty 6 territory by sharing stories of our lived experiences. The show strives to highlight our collective ethno-cultural linguistic diversity and heritage, reflect who we are as a city, and bring about positive social change. New episodes will be launching at the end of this month. Find it in Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, or anywhere that you listen to podcasts. And check it out at otherwiseshow.com. Now let's get back to our last story from Eric Kallenborn about the weirdest text message he's ever received.
So in our district, we use, and I know a lot of teachers use this app, we use an app called Remind, Remind 101. And you have groups, and you usually set up a Remind for your classroom, and you set up a Remind for if you're running any clubs or activities. And the kids joined the app, and you can message them through the app. They can message you through the app, and nobody knows each other's phone numbers. It's all done, through the app. So if I want to say, hey guys, we're doing a fundraiser, I need people to help, I'll send that out through the app. Or if I want to remind students that they have to read a certain number of pages for homework, I'll use the Remind app. So I took a group of students to Europe this summer, and I was at the airport, and our flight was delayed, and we're just sitting there and we're waiting to go from Chicago to New York to catch our flight over to Switzerland. And I got a message from the app from a student in my game club. And so a little bit of background here. I drive the white bus that we have. Our school has a small white bus, and I'm certified to drive it because I coach chess. Mm-hmm. And I take the chess team on the bus to the tournaments, right?
Okay.
The bus seats about 14 people. So I get a text, and the text says, hey, quick question. Do you still have access to the white bus? And this is in the middle of summer from a student who is going to be a senior. And I said, yes, why? And he says, and as I'm quoting this from the text message now,
okay,
just wondering if you could take me and my Wendy's gang around town whenever we want to go, and we pay you in cash. I know it's a weird question, but I have to ask. So this kid works at the local Wendy's,
yeah,
and he wanted to know if I would chauffeur him and his Wendy's gang around town whenever they wanted, and they would pay me in cash. And I lost it. I was like, this is the funniest thing I've ever had asked of me as a teacher. And I said, no. And then he replied with, okay, that's what I thought. Sorry. But with the idea that this kid was sitting at home, probably at work, and his Wendy's gang wanted to go and do something, but they didn't want to drive. So they wanted me, and they don't have a car big enough for all of them.
Yeah.
He wanted me to take the white bus from school and drive them around town and then pay me in cash was the funniest idea. I think, I don't know. I lost it. Me and my wife made that joke for the entire trip in Europe.
Oh my gosh, that is so good.
If I could share one story with you off the top of my head, that's the one I got to share because that just happened and I think it's hilarious.
And if you want to hear more Ed stories, check-ins, and conversations, you can subscribe to Ed on Apple Podcasts. Just look up Ed Conversations. We can also be found on Spotify and every other podcatcher out there. Ed is a proud member of the Alberta Podcast Network powered by ATB. You can find this and all other member podcasts at albertapodcastnetwork.com. Ed can also be heard on Voice Ed Radio. It's 24-hour internet broadcasting devoted to the best ideas in education. Just head over to voiced.ca. So, on behalf of myself and all of our storytellers, thank you so much for listening, and we'll catch you next time.